All right, now let's talk to a woman who is pulling off a bit of a miraculous upset, at least as things stand now. Yuh-Line Niou is running in what is now the infamous 10th Congressional District in New York. And she is one of actually several progressives in that race, honestly. Yuh-Line, first of all, welcome to the show. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem, but I'm gonna dive right in. Okay, so first I have a warning for you. We interviewed Bill de Blasio about a week ago. He dropped out right afterwards. So I'm not saying anything, so just be careful. Okay, so he was in that race. Mondaire Jones, who's a current congressman, is in that race. There's a number of others that are in that race. It's a very progressive district, so it makes sense that there's a couple of progressives in there. But a poll came out, part of the reason that de Blasio dropped out was because he came in at 3%. Mondaire Jones came in at only 8%, you came in at 16%. So, and leading the pack. So my first question is, how'd you do that?
Well, I think I've already represented part of this district in the state assembly for the past 6 years. So my entire assembly district is actually within New York 10. And I know that we have an incredible field operation. I have to credit my amazing supporters for this and also my amazing staff for this, because we have over now 850 volunteers, and I can't even make that up.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, that's a big number. I always tell the story. Dianne Feinstein, we had a progressive running against her last time, and we had lots of volunteers too. And then we checked Feinstein's website to see where you could volunteer. She wasn't even asking for volunteers because she had so much money, she didn't care. But for progressives, you need volunteers, and the 850 is a very impressive number. So I get that. So tell us more about the dynamics of this race, because for 98% of the races, we have a progressive against an awful establishment, corporate-backed, Democratic leadership-backed billionaire heiress, right? That's usually how it goes. But so help progressives understand why they should pick you instead of one of the other folks in this race, because this one's unique.
Yeah, so I think I have to think about a little bit back to why I even got into, how I got into politics in the first place. Like when I was young, I thought that government was something that just happened to me, right? Laws just happened to me. Regulations were just something that we just had to obey. And everybody probably feels this way right now in America, that we just can't make that change that we want to see, right? And I always felt like there was some big secret to accessing government. But the more I learned about government, and when I was an intern, I started to see this, and I realized that there's actually no big secret. What was happening is that there are powerful people that don't want us to realize that we, the people, have the power, right, to make that change if we want to make things change. I'm running to show people that when we mobilize and come together, we can make government work for us. And I think that right now, our country is in crisis. We know that. We are seeing people getting killed every single day. People are losing their rights. We've lost our bodily autonomy. We've seen mass murder after mass murder after mass murder, and there's so many shootings. And what we right now need in our country is obviously political courage. And I think that comes from having a good lens on what it is that our country needs to see things through, right? And I think that, for a real progressive, for defining what progressive means, I think that we have to be people who are looking through a lens of racial justice, social justice, environmental justice, and always making sure that we're centering disabilities, and then making sure that we have economic justice at the center of all of it, and making sure that everything's interconnected in a way that helps everybody. Because if we are fighting for a more transparent and a more accessible and a more just and fair government and society, then that's really what makes us set apart.
So your district also is a bit of a dichotomy. You've got a lot of young progressives in there, but you also have Wall Street in your district, so that's interesting. And then, and you've got a situation here where you're a big proponent of criminal justice reform, including ending cash bail, but at the same time, you're also the victim of some hateful attacks, and the Asian community at large, both in New York, your district, and you've got 2 Chinatowns in your district, which is amazing. That might be the only district in America that has 2 of them. But all across the country, Asians have been targeted by hate crimes, and so you've got that your own community there, and I can say your own community because you've got 2 Chinatowns in your district, like I said, is very concerned about that crime. So how do you square that? How do you talk to everybody in the community about criminal justice reform while keeping everyone safe?
Well, I think that, first off, criminal justice reform is to keep people safer, right? And it's also, talking about making sure that we have the kinds of changes that are actually going to make us have real community safety. And when we're talking about real community safety, we have to talk about prevention, right? And when we're talking about all of the hatred and the violence that has been happening towards all of our different communities, there's been so much anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Asian hatred. This has been, there's no secret weapon or some like kind of silver bullet or some kind of magic wand to wave over us to make things different. What is happening right now is that there is basically what we are seeing is basically that there is state-sanctioned racism that is constantly happening, right? I mean, the anti-Asian sentiment is so deep, and it's part of what our country is built on, right? We have the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Japanese internment, the misogyny laws, the things that make it so that there is a question of whether or not this community belongs here, right? And I think that the way that we change that is to make sure that we are dismantling piece by piece by piece all of these different pieces of legislation that have this racism built into it, making sure that we have representation at the highest levels, whether it's our representation in Congress, whether it's representation in our state legislature, our city legislature, and all of the different agencies, including the NYPD, including all of the different places that we actually need to see a change and then actually have representation to talk about our community's needs. I think that that's really, really important. Making sure that we have language access so that people can actually have the social services that they deserve and get to the social services that they deserve is so important. Making sure that we actually have, people who are on the ground, the community organizations fully funded in order to make sure that they can continue to do the work that they're doing, but also amplify and grow the work that they're doing so that our communities are actually feeling safer, because all of that is prevention. And that way, there's more visibility, and then people also realize that we belong here. And that's part of the reason why I'm running. It's also to make sure that people, even when I'm getting all of this hatred and you're seeing it online, when people are seeing all of this vitriol, it's to make me scared, right? And it's really to try to make it so that I will stop, or that I will stop speaking out, and that I will stop being visible. But I think that the only way to change that is to make sure that we are more visible, to make sure that people understand that we belong here and that we are part of this country, and to make sure that people understand that we have representation, and that is something that means a lot and changes people's perceptions in whole.
So of course I agree with almost everything you said. A lot of people don't recognize Asians have suffered more legal discrimination in this country than almost anyone else. I say almost anyone else because the Chinese were literally the only ones by law excluded from America, saying you cannot come to America. That was a law that was passed. And the Japanese, of course, were the only ones interned. Obviously, other races have suffered terribly here as well. So I think criminal justice reform, I agree with you, can lower crime. But that's a prelude to me asking about cash bail. So I wanted to end cash bail as well, but I'm now concerned that that there was something I did not expect that happened. I should have known better because I went to law school, but a giant number of crimes are called misdemeanors that are actually violent. And so in New York, there's been some spectacular cases. Lee Zeldin, a representative, was attacked. That guy's got released. I don't know if it was ending cash bail that did it, I don't know. There was a subway attack there where the woman got feces smeared on her face and the guy's let go right away, et cetera. And it's driving people crazy, right? So did we make a mistake there in ending cash bail, or what's your take on that?
So we actually didn't end up implementing the bail reforms that we had actually written into law. And I think that bail reform, people don't really understand what bail reform is. And I think that we have to really talk about that, right? The judges all still have judicial discretion, and it is something that I think people don't realize. And I also think that people don't realize that the reason why we talked about having bail reform is because, first off, the concept of bail is actually rooted in slavery, and the reason why it's so unfair is because it's based off of your means. And so two people, you and I, we could commit the same crime, and because I'm wealthy and you are not, and the bail that was set was a certain amount, and I can pay it and you couldn't, I go home anyway. And even though we commit the same crime, I go home and you have to sit in Rikers.
Yeah, no, I know. That's why I'm in favor of ending cash bail. And obviously, you're making a devastating point in the case in New York that you guys didn't end cash bail. So there goes that. Right.
Yeah, we end cash bail, and I think that that's why it's so confusing for people, because they are still seeing that when a death ticket is issued wrong, or if a judge made a judicial discretion that somebody could leave, or if somebody who had committed a particular incident or crime, there was no cash bail set in the first place in any time period, if that was already something that was or if they paid the cash bail, and that then they were let go, and so I think that is what people are blaming a lot of things on, but I don't think that is the reason for a lot of the things that we are seeing. Well, I think that if we want to stop repeat offenders or recidivism, there's a lot of different things that we can do to stop recidivism.
Yeah, and so in New York, given that it wasn't ended, it's definitive. So then I think the judges are using the wrong discretion. They should have never let those folks out, in my opinion. Anyways, so Yuh-Line, I wanted to ask you one more question. So also what distinguishes sometimes progressives from one another is their willingness to challenge Democratic leadership. So we've had tons of progressive candidates on this show, and they all are lions during the primaries. And then if they win and they go into Congress, then they are taught that objecting to Democratic leadership is the biggest crime in America. And so I'm gonna ask you, I don't know that I can really trust anyone to do it anymore, but if you win and you go to Congress, will you defy Nancy Pelosi if she's opposed to a progressive position, which is, by the way, almost every time?
I think it depends on what the issue is, obviously, and I think that it depends on what stance I'm taking, or what values that I'm upholding, of course, which are of course progressive values from my end. But I think that I think my track record is pretty clear that even when I felt like I was alone, and it was important for me to show my district what it was that I was working on in Albany, and telling folks, this is the reason why I'm going to be voting no on this thing, or this is the reason why I'm going to be standing up to this thing. It was always about providing accessible and transparent representation. And I just want to give an example of the austerity budget that was proposed by our then Governor Andrew Cuomo, which was in March of 2020, during the very beginning of the very worst part of the pandemic. And that was when it was kind of just getting really kind of ramped up. And we were about to pass a budget that was an austerity budget, instead of one that would invest in our communities in the way that I felt like were very important at a time when we needed to be able to stop a really incredible, what I knew was going to be a recession coming up, which we're in now. And I knew that we needed to be investing in our healthcare during a global pandemic. We needed to be investing in our social services during a global pandemic, and we needed to be investing in our public schools during a global pandemic. But instead, he cut across the board. He cut healthcare, he cut social services, he cut education. And I knew that that wasn't a budget that was actually going to help us. And there is actually, a floor speech that I did to make sure that people understood where I was coming from. And when I gave that speech, a lot of my colleagues also started to talk to me about why I was saying what I was saying. And then we had formed quite a bit of a coalition to where we almost overturned the budget. It only passed by 1 vote. And so I think that it's really important for us to speak out when we see something is wrong. I was also one of the first to speak out about the campaign finance issues that Andrew Cuomo had. And I was also, even though he was our governor, even though a lot of people felt it was very frightening to speak up against him, I felt like it was important to. And I also made sure to vote against, him having certain special executive powers during a time when, with the language that it used, actually very similar to the language of the Japanese internment executive order directives. And I think that it was interesting that it was something that was passed in the middle of the night and with very little scrutiny, and he didn't need those executive powers. What he didn't need the legislators to give up our powers to give to the executive to be able to make certain directives, because he could have used the abilities of the commissioner, the health commissioner. And so we needed to make sure that we stepped up and stood up against those moments and had good leadership, powerful leadership and political courage to be able to do that. And I think that every single time I had a track record of being willing to step up. And I think that, we have to make sure that we are doing that when we need to in order to fight for the people. Because I don't want to just be there to save a seat. I want to be there to save my people.
Yep. And look, I've read the platform, and first of all, that is excellent evidence that you would stand up to Democratic leadership, and in favor of all the progressive positions. In fact, her supporters call it the Green New Deal, as in N-I-O-U. Your last name is spelled, which leads perfectly to newfornewyork.com is the website. That's N-I-O-U for newyork.com. There it is. We'll put the links down below if you're watching later on YouTube or Facebook. Easy to click those. Yuh-Line Niou, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. So good to meet you in person.
No problem. All right, take care. Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.